Hello, welcome to the Colors for Craft podcast, the podcast that aims to educate, inform, and engage our audiences about the meanings of color, textile and craft coloration practices, and the future of color through research, education, and experiences stemming from the Colors for Craft project based at the University of Helsinki. I am your host, Dr. Dustin Neighbors. In today's episode, we explore how craft sciences, textile art, and design are taught and how craft skills are learned by talking with both the instructor and students of the Colors for Craft course, Experimental Textile Expression at the University of Lapland. Join us as we discuss the process of teaching and learning experimental textile techniques and artistic expression involving natural dyes, and the importance of this education as part of the Colors for Craft project. Please allow me to introduce all of our guests. Jenni-Liisa Oleniva works as a Faculty of Art and Design at the University of Lapland as a university teacher in textiles. She teaches and writes mainly in the field of textile art, printing, and dyeing. In her research, Jenni-Liisa studies the traditional craft of roundel weaving in Rear Bosnia, southern Lapland. For the Colors for Craft project, Jenni-Liisa not only teaches courses, she also develops teaching materials and organizes workshops on natural dyes. Piritta Mattila is a master's student in fashion and design at the University of Lapland. She is interested in sustainable natural dyeing with mushrooms. In addition to her master's thesis, Piritta has coordinated the Colors for Craft Seasons of Color exhibition in 2024. Dipti Thappa is a crafts artist who's recently completed her master's in sustainable art and design from the University of Lapland in 2024, in which the course Experimental Textile Expression was a part of this degree. Her interests are on the development of sustainable art, natural materials, and community well-being, which was the focus of her master's thesis titled Art-Based Practice in Nature for Community Well-Being. And finally, Laura Vertela is a student in fashion and textile design at the University of Lapland. She has used natural dyes in her own crafts, as well as having participated in the Experimental Textile Expression course in 2023 and the Colors for Craft Seasons of Color exhibition in 2024. Laura hoped to integrate natural dyeing techniques in her studies and hopefully also use them in her work after graduating. Jenni-Liisa, Piritta, Dipti, and Laura, welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the Colors for Craft project. We're delighted to have you here, and I'm excited to learn a little bit about each of you, especially for the experimental textile expression workshop that you guys were a part of. So first off, who are you? Get to know who you are. Let's start with Jenni-Liisa.
Hey, hello everyone. So my name is Jenni-Liisa Oleniva and I work as a teacher, university teacher at the Faculty of Art and Design in the University of Lapland. And I have been the teacher in the Experimental Textile Expression workshop, which was a part of our textile art minor studies here.
Thank you. And next we will have Piritta.
Hi, I am Piritta. I study at the University of Lapland and I actually took the course last year, not with the others, but I have taken the same course. And
it'll be interesting to get your perspective, especially the ones who took it recently versus the ones who took it in the past. So thank you for joining us. Next, we have Dipti.
Hi, I'm originally from Nepal and I have been living now in Finland for about 4 years. So I happened to just finish my master's and got the opportunity to do this textile minor course. And I have just actually recently finished this master's thesis. So and then I just started to work now as a part-time teaching for the arts for the students here in a different town in Kalajoki, which is about 4 hours south from Rovaniemi.
Well, congratulations on finishing your master's thesis. Anytime we finish something at this level,
Yes.
it's a good thing.
It's a big relief now.
Yeah, I'm sure the pressure's off. And finally, we have Laura.
Yeah, so my name's Laura, or Laura in English, that's fine too. And I'm studying industrial and textile design at the University of Lapland. And I took the experimental textile expressions course last year together with Dipti as part of the minor studies for textile art.
Well, this is great. And again, it's great to have different perspectives from all of you here. So we look forward to kind of jumping into this with you. But let's start off with, because Dipti, you started to talk a little bit, but look, what is your background? How did you come to, what is your interest relating to the course, and how did you come to be part of the course? Lisa, I guess we'll start with you since you are the teacher.
Yeah, so my background is I studied textile design as well, so I have the master's degree from the University of Lapland. I have worked as a freelancer designer, mainly with recycled materials, and I worked as a part-time teacher before starting in my current position. Also this fall, I started my PhD studies about the traditional textiles from this area, so Rear Botnian Raanu textiles, and that is also a connection to the natural dyes in the sense that that I'm very interested in looking at the very old traditional textiles and see perhaps if I can replicate those colors by dyeing. Which is something that the Color for Crafts project is also working on. But yeah, with natural dyes, I worked a little bit during my studies in the early 2000s, but more recently I have been now teaching them for a few years, and I feel like I know just a scratch now, and there is so much to learn about them and so much to explore. So I'm really happy to be able to do that with the students in the workshops.
Have you always been interested in textile fashion design?
Yeah, I suppose so, and in crafts. Like as a kid, I was learning about crafts from my mother, and I've been doing them all my life. And then somehow the textile design seemed like a good continuation of that.
My mother as well was a teacher, but she also was very much into crafting. She sewed our clothes every summer. She made them from scratch. So that's something that I've always had as well, kind of in my background, that knowledge, even though I'm not a crafter. I've never done fashion design. I've always been interested in Project Runway, that kind of show, but I've never done that as well. So that's really good to come back from that. Parista, what about you?
Just like Jenny-Liisa, I have always been interested in crafts and doing crafts. And actually, after 10 years of making a career in communications and pedagogics, I kind of came back to my roots and started studying fashion and textile arts, University of Lapland. And I have done experimenting on natural dyes before, and I have studied that a little bit. And I am actually a mushroom enthusiastic. So studying in the University of Lapland and experimental textiles expression workshop has provided me a professional setting to experiment natural dyes and mushroom dyes, and I've really been enjoying that.
Well, that's good. And that's interesting to see where everybody comes from, because you said you were in a communication background. Was there something where was it like, okay, I'm done with communication. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go back to, it was just a natural progression of I'm doing this, but I'm now time to move on.
Yeah, it kind of needed a change, but then I really enjoyed my previous work, but I also was missing doing the crafts and doing the artistic work and getting to use my time on that, trying to pursue something that will connect all the things enthusiastic about textile arts.
Yeah, so it's a passion that you were getting back to. Yeah. Laura, what about you?
Well, I started out at the University of Lapland. I originally studied industrial design, where I'm now working on my master's, and now I'd been thinking about it for a while, but last year I took the textile arts minor originally as like, so I'd have a minor for the industrial design degree. I sort of went off the deep end a little bit, and now I'm fully studying another degree in textile design as well, or like textile and fashion design. I think similarly to Jenny-Liisa and Piritta as well, like I've always kind of had like some kind of crafting background. I learned a lot from my grandma, for example, and with the natural dyes, I did a tiny, I tried it out a little bit before the course, but most of my experience came with the course from last year. I guess that's about it. I sort of at first it was more of a hobby, but now I ended up fully in the in the textiles world. So
Dipti, what about you? How did you come to the course?
Um,
What is your background related to textile, natural dyes, that kind of?
I actually had absolutely no background in the textile. I have been studying as an art student, so I have done my Bachelor's of Arts and in graphic and technologies, and then in Finland I started to do this sustainable art and design. So my actual master's thesis was based on nature. So it was like nature setting for the community well-being. So I was working a lot with the natural setting and the natural materials. I made a series of lot of naturally dried mandalas, for example. And I think the word nature and natural always have kind of been close to me because I have been living close to the nature, and I have liked also ingesting natural things. So living in a different country. So I have had this natural, like this interest to understand nature, the power of nature in general. And when I was in Lapland University, and also I feel that generally being in Finland, somehow in this last 4 years, I get the feeling that people are more close to the nature here. I feel they are more aware, and I have felt their love and their respect for the nature in general. Just living in this small town and also visiting cities here in Finland got me this kind of I couldn't escape this natural dyes and this textiles experimental thing, because it was kind of happening in all these little places. I thought while I'm there in the university, why I don't take this course, because I have absolutely no idea about the textile. And I'm so thankful for Jenny, because she gave me the opportunity to, get into this course, because I had seriously no idea. But I had all the interest for the colors and, understanding craft work. So
I completely understand your point about being here in Finland or in the Nordic countries in general, and this feeling of the love of nature. One of the things that I've been working on is female hunting in the past. And so that's very connected to nature. And one of the things that I've learned, particularly in the Nordic countries, is this idea of the right of every man, the right of every man to go to different parts. And I think that's something that's very unique to Nordic countries. I'm from the US, I've lived in the UK. There's not this idea in those places. It's like, this is my
exactly.
property, this is my land. Whereas in the Nordic countries, it's like, if you want to partake in nature, if you want to get berries, if you want to get certain things from nature, you can go and do that. Is
Right.
Nepal, where you're from, is there anything like that in your
Oh
culture?
yeah. So actually my little background is that I was born in Hong Kong,
Okay.
and I have lived in Hong Kong, but I have lived in India for 10 years. Then I have lived in Nepal, and then I was in Spain 7 years before I moved to Finland.
Mhm.
So, and then I visit UK because all my families are based in London. And having lived in all these countries, of course, culture has been a big part of me. So colors, for example, in our festivals and our ceremonies has been since my childhood. So color is very attractive to me, and I still don't understand why in Nordic countries people wear a lot of black. Because when I go to other countries, my countries and other countries where I have been living, it's like everybody's like so colorful. And sometimes I wonder if the Nordic people would go to these countries, maybe they get bamboozled. Yeah, and color has been big part of us and our culture. So that way, yes, in India and Nepal, natural dyeing in the textile has been a big part, and I have been hearing that a lot since my childhood. And it was part of our fabrics that we stitched. We had tailors, family tailors. So I kind of always had that in my life, but I never understood the process and what people goes through to have this. So I have kind of probably taking it for granted.
Well, this is a great perspective to have here, and we will come back to the discussion of color in just a minute. Now that we've gotten to know you and all of this stuff, I think we've kind of talked about the next question a little bit. What is your connection to natural dyes? Why are you interested in it? How did you come to natural dyes? Throwing that out there for everyone.
Well, for me at least, I started crafting when I was little. My grandma taught me like how to embroider and how to knit, and in Finland you also kind of learn in primary school a little bit, at least the basics. I think they taught us how to knit a mitten, and for a very long time that was the only thing I knew how to make. And then I also did a lot of weaving as a hobby when I was like starting from when I was little. I think maybe in the last 2-3 years I picked up other crafts again. It started with embroidery, and then I went on to knitting, and it just sort of, as it tends to go, I think, with a lot of crafts, you just sort of like accumulate hobbies as you go. But in any case, again, a little bit of background on me. I'm half Hungarian, so this is my Hungarian grandma who taught me most of the sort of crafty things that I know. A few years ago, I went to visit my mom who lives in Hungary, and she's got like a big garden in her house. And I don't remember exactly where it came from, but I was kind of looking around her garden and I was like, oh, what if I could like dye wool or like dye yarn with all of these plants here? And then I just sort of, well, my mom was a little bit horrified because then I took over her kitchen and I had like leaves, leaves of all of these plants, like just sort of floating in vats in her kitchen. and I think I spent a week there, and I was just every day I was like trying out a different, like I think I tried out maybe ivy leaves and walnut leaves and things like, and like the walnut like shells and stuff like that. So that was, I just kind of tried it out. I didn't have a lot of materials or anything, and I didn't really do it the sort of proper way, and I was just doing it for fun. But it was kind of great doing it, like collecting all the materials from my mom's garden there, and sort of knowing that all of the stuff that I produced was directly from her garden or like our garden, and I still have like all of the little, like I made these, like it was only like very very like tiny bits of yarn, and I still have all of them as kind of like a color palette. I haven't like used them for anything because I think just having them as as the yarn, like little balls of yarn, is already special enough in a way. And I think it was about the same time that I applied to do the textile art minor, and then in the autumn when we started the courses, and I went to on the first class of the experimental textile expression course, we were told that it's about natural dyes, and I was like, oh my god, like this is such a like it was kind of like a coincidence, as in I had just done something similar in the spring and then I get to continue it right away in the autumn. And I mean, so I didn't have a lot of background with natural dyes or anything like that, but I think like that course like really sort of opened my eyes to, and because we did it in a lot like a much more sort of controlled and like more scientific way, where we had the proper materials and like better equipment and a proper space for it, and we had to like experiment on everything and like kind of go through this sort of process. So it was a lot. I learned a lot in that course, and I thought it was really really great. And then it was like interesting also to see like what kind of colors I had gotten from a completely different place, as in like a different country, a different time of year, completely different plants. I mean, like for example, like walnut trees don't really grow in Finland, so you can't get those dyes. Or there were like other plants too, I think. I don't remember all of them, but it was interesting to compare the differences between the dyes that I got from my mom's garden in Hungary, and then the dyes that we got in my group for the course here in Finland. And well, I think Piritta mentioned that she's a mushroom enthusiast, and we decided to focus on mushrooms as well for that course with my group. So then it's really interesting seeing how many different dyes you could get from like such different materials, like whether that's plant leaves or the walnut shells and things like that, and then like mushrooms, which first you might not think that mushrooms really produce much dye, or it was stepping into a completely new world. Like there's so so much to learn, so much to do.
Just because that what Laura said, how there is so much color, so many different colors that you can achieve from so many varieties of these natural materials. But the other thing what I also kind of learned, because we take it for granted, all these materials, and in Finland, we are living in a place where there's 6 months snow. The availability of the material is so limited, and then you have to kind of know when to harvest it and forage it. And then just because we had the luxury in the university, like everything was ready, although the students were free to collect, in the summertime and autumn time. But to understand even like how these materials have came, what seasons they have been collected, was it warm, was it cold? Did you have to harvest it like away before the hand and dry them out? And like again thinking about nature, like it's just you just have to understand how the nature works and work closely with it.
Absolutely. I think that also raises some question in terms of the future if you've got, and this is something we could talk about, but it raises the question of in the time that because there's so much snow and you can harvest it, is there a way to organically kind of grow this in environments or create buildings and cultivate that in a different way? I think that raises the question here so that you have more of those ingredients to use for the dyeing. The different seasons from different countries, what's available, what's not available. And I think, so we were talking at one of the consortium meetings where at certain times of the year, there's actually certain plants that grow on top of this mountain in this one area where you have to travel up to and pick. So it's really interesting to see that and what do we do and how can we cultivate that, especially for the future?
Yeah, it's funny that Dipti would mention that harvesting. I was going to say that my connection to natural dyes began with mushrooms, but actually it began with the harvesting parts. I've always been the girl that goes into the forest and into the nature and picks things up, just everything that I can get and I can do stuff with. And then it kind of escalated into mushroom picking, and I've been active in the Lapland Mushroom Associations for almost 20 years now, learning about all the mushroom species and what can you do with them and how can you study them scientifically, and then about mushroom dyeing. So when I started studying the university, I kind of dove into the mushroom dyeing enthusiasm.
And that sounds like between the three of you, at least the student, nature has always been an inspiration. You've drawn inspiration from nature, particularly on your interest related to natural dyes and textiles. That's fantastic. And that, I think, shows one of the things that you can be inspired anywhere. And it can, for you, Laura, that's really interesting that you went to your mother's garden, got the idea, and then took it upon yourself to actually practice. Nobody prompted you. I wish we had more students that were doing that, doing their own experiments and stuff like that. And you, Lisa?
Yeah, I think this harvesting thing that you have now, I think all of you have mentioned, it's something so like sort of within us here in maybe in Scandinavian countries, but in Finland for sure, that we learn as kids already to go and harvest berries and maybe mushrooms too. So then to sort of put that knowledge and the sort of habit of harvesting into something like natural dyes, it also kind of continues a tradition somehow, I think. And for me, definitely the harvesting part is a big part of it and very interesting part. And I love gardening. I've been gardening for a few years, and I have quite a few dye plants growing in my garden also. And I think that was like something that brought my attention again to the natural dyes. Like since my studies, I hadn't used them much for a few years. And then with this, I was like kind of just experimenting all the things that I can grow in my garden, and dye plants are one of those things. So I have quite a few flowers, and I have now woad growing also. So there's kind of a small color palette growing in my garden at this moment. And that harvesting part of that is also, maybe the whole sort of holistic process of growing the plants from the seed and then watching them grow and then being able to harvest and then make something beautiful out of that. So it's pretty great, I would say.
So I guess that leads me to the question then for you, Lisa, is because we're all talking about the inspiration and talking about the natural dyes, how we came to it. What was the reason for, or the purpose or the goal of the experimental textile expression workshop?
Well, that is, like, as mentioned, it is a part of our textile art minor studies. Well, the course content is not only about natural dyes, it's really about learning to work in an experimental and material-led manner, and also developing the student's expression as artist or designer. And we do a lot of like observing and documentation and reflecting on their textile processes on the course. And maybe like in a practical sense, try to teach students to design and produce surfaces using different textile techniques. And natural dyes is just one of them, which we have been focusing more in the recent years because, well, it seems to be quite an important aspect of the textiles in this moment. And also a great interest of the students. So we've been like following on that and focusing on natural dyes. But also we don't just dye in this workshop. There's also then the whole like other process of yarn techniques like weaving and tufting, for example. And last fall we had like more of a specific goal in the workshop to produce a collective textile artwork using natural dyes as a starting point. So it was not just about experimentation and trying out different ways of dyeing and then weaving and tufting and making samples, but it was also to create a textile artwork in a small group. So that's sort of the aims and focus of the workshop.
Well, you kind of bring up an interesting point when you talk about the idea of the natural dyes, and natural is very much in the now. Can you explain a little bit about that, especially as a teacher who is teaching a younger generation or the next generation of scholars? What does it mean that this is the moment now related to natural dyes, natural textiles, natural materials?
Yeah, well, I see it like as a part of the whole development for a more sustainable textile industry. So as in that whole big question, natural dyes may be able to produce at least part of the little answers to the problems that we have with the industry. And the dyeing of textile is a huge pollutant, so we do need to look at other ways of dyeing, and maybe going back to the past when we were able to produce a lot of beautiful colors from the nature. And of course, like, natural dyes are not only beautiful and wonderful, there's also risks to that, and we need to learn about those risks also, and also teach about those risks as well. And that's the reason why it is important now, I think, at least from the sustainability perspective, but maybe also aesthetically. It seems that in the color trends, you see more and more of these natural hues. Of course, the color trends do not come from nothing. They are following these bigger changes in the culture and society. So in many ways, I think now is the time, or maybe the time was already yesterday. But yeah, for sure. Looking into the future, I see it as a bigger part of what we are teaching, and also in the industry.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting is now more than ever, I think people starting to realize, or not starting to realize, I think they're starting to feel the impact of climate change and what's contributing to that with the current, hurricanes and tornadoes and all of that stuff that's happening in the US and other places around the world, that we're seeing this devastation, but it's also coming from kind of the climate change. How do we mitigate that? How do we change that? And I think changing the perspective as well. So is that one of the reasons why you would say the workshop is important?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely see that the future designers and artists do need to learn about these alternative ways of production, because if they will be working in the industry, having this knowledge in the background will help them make choices in their design work. But I think also in general, the workshop is important, really important in developing the students' expression. And I think like just the artistic and the aesthetic expression is also something that we shouldn't ignore it or shy away from it or find it less important. There's a lot of great things can happen when you have sort of a freedom to experiment and try out stuff with a kind of an open-ended task. So the whole experimentation and reflecting on on what you're doing and what you're learning is really important, I think.
I agree with that 100% because I think experiments also raises more questions. And I think that as researchers, that's a very important thing for us at university, academic world, especially for the broader public to understand, is that sometimes it's not about the fixed goal, but it's the question that we raise and how we get there because we learn through the process and it triggers new ideas and it triggers new innovation. And I think experimental research is sometimes the best thing because it teaches us the right questions to ask. I mean, as someone who's a historian who I'm by the book, I have to go with very traditional techniques. The idea of experimental research through digital reconstruction, using digital tools for research, from my perspective as a historian, it is very much, okay, that's so far out there. What is it actually going to teach us? It's going to, then you run the risk of anachronism or it being too dated and it being too modern. I think, again, it asks us the question because then it gets us to the techniques of how something is made or how it was received or experienced by people because those questions come up in that experimental. So I think it's fantastic and agree that the freedom through experimental research is really important because it allows you to explore that. I'm going to kind of jump down and ask the students themselves, what did you take away from it?
Yeah, I can start.
Oh, sorry, you can go, Dipti.
While, Jenny was explaining about all these technicalities and the practicality of the natural dyeing, there was something that hit me also during the conversation was that, the philosophical aspect of it. Now Jenny has grown all these dyes in her garden and, like she had mentioned, like through the whole process of since the start to the end, like she's like with the process all the time, growing with that. And I think that's quite beautiful as an artist. I got the chance to kind of be part of my artwork from the beginning to the end. And I feel like when we abstract this natural color from the nature and we have kind of dyed them in the fabric, so we kind of wear it or, for example, if it's for textile or if it's an artwork, I began to kind of think like how this textile art could be an art. That was actually never even in my head before. I never thought actually textile could be turned into an art. Again, mainly because in India, Nepal, it was part of the culture. It was not considered an art in that sense in those times. Maybe now it have changed. But the dyeing, the tie-dyes, the block printings, all these were just a part of the culture. And that also brings another question, like, is culture art kind of going hand in hand? But it kind of made me to see the whole textile industry and the whole natural dye in a very new perspective that I never had kind of imagined before. Like, how could you like knit something to be an artwork, Because traditionally I have been just painting and using mixed medias and digital. So that was something very new to me. And I think that have opened a new perspective about seeing the textile world as itself as an artwork and going a bit more philosophically, going to deep layers of, different ways of thinking and being part of the life. And it was quite beautiful. And
I think that's a very good point, is the way that we think about, where we think about logically, practically, it then can turn into something that makes us think more broadly, more culturally, the impact of it. Laura, Perdita, what did you take away from it?
So I think for me, what was really interesting was, I guess, the whole process and how it all works, because so we focused on the mushrooms with my group in that course. And I mean, there were some materials at the university already, but I think last year was an especially good mushroom year in all of Finland. And so we ended up gathering a lot of our materials as well. And I mean, I can probably I don't know, many hours in the forest, just sort of picking mushrooms. I found a book in the library about mushroom dyeing, and then I just went out into the forest with the book and tried to identify the mushrooms, and then saw, sort of like tried to pay attention to what there is a lot of, and then some mushroom species were endangered, so then I didn't want to like pick too many of those, or they're ones that you're supposed to leave alone. So I was like, oh well, there's some of them here, but I shouldn't pick them, so I'll leave them alone. And sort of the whole process starting from zero, where for me, at least about the mushrooms, I didn't really have too much knowledge, because before, when I had gone mushroom picking, it was usually for to gather the edible mushrooms, so I knew how to recognize a few of the edible ones, but then the dye mushrooms are a completely different category. So it was kind of doing everything from zero, where I just went to the forest with a basket, zero knowledge, and my book, and then I had to start from zero, trying to find the mushrooms and identifying the mushrooms, and then gathering them, and then I took them home and I dried them in my apartment. So my apartment floor was full of mushrooms for about. And then, going through the whole process of then dyeing it, like making the dye bath and preparing the yarn, and then dyeing the yarn and drying it, and then making the actual artwork at the end of the course. I think I sort of went into the course expecting more. Maybe I was expecting it to focus a bit more on the actual textile production, or are you going to weave, or are you going to embroider, or whatever. Like I was expecting it to focus more on the actual textile techniques, but then in the end it felt like that was just like a very small part of the course, and a very big part of the course was just sort of learning the whole process of like gathering and producing natural materials, and like producing the dyes, and like learning about that whole process. And it sort of really gave an appreciation of how long it takes, and what Dipti also mentioned, that we have like 6 months of snow in Finland, and for example, mushrooms only really grow in the autumn, or like autumn is kind of mushroom season. So if you miss it, as in if you think in December, like, oh, I would like to use, like find some mushrooms to dye with some mushrooms, well, you're kind of out of luck, because then you have to wait 9 months until the next September to be able to gather the mushrooms. So it's all like, it's like a very long process, and you really have to kind of, find out like what's in season when, and what you can do in what part of the year, or in different parts of the world. And it really sort of gave a very big appreciation of how it all works, and how much effort and how much work and sort of how much like care and attention you need to give it. And then in the end, the textile you produce feels like it has, it's not just maybe the 10 hours you spent weaving it, or whatever amount of time it took to make it. It's also like the other 50 hours behind it, of when you were gathering the dye plants and making the dyes, and so on. And it gives so much more of an appreciation for the whole process, and the whole, and I don't know, like what Jenny-Liisa kind of mentioned with the problems of the textile industry. I feel like if more people sort of realized how much effort goes into a lot of this, and how long it takes, and how much like care you need to produce textiles or clothes, or yarn, like dyed yarn for crafts, or things like that. Like I think maybe the textile industry would be in a bit of a better place. There would be like more awareness of it. Yeah, I think that was the main takeaway for me.
Can I add just a little bit on that too?
Yes.
Just because now Laura mentioned about materials, I used actually onion skins to give a yellow color. Usually in India we used to use turmeric, because it was readily available in the market, and it was quite cheap and cost effective. But when I discovered that I could come up with different gradients of yellow with the onion skin, I was like, wow. And I'm kind of hooked up now, because before we would just like throw away the skins. And I mean, we never ate that or did anything with it. If I would have garden, maybe I would like put it for the biorecycle. But now I'm just like collecting the onion skin, because as Laura said, the process is so long, and then we kind of have to adapt to the seasons and the circumstances and all kind of conditions. But the other thing I also discovered was that now I'm just kind of mastering this onion skin dye, because that itself, just the one material, takes so long. And I'm so glad we get onions all the time. So I can dye all year round.
That's a very interesting point, of the fact that you're talking about using onion skins year round. That shows another level of conservation to society, another way that because I grew up with composting. That was the big thing in my era. The big thing was composting when I was growing up. But that adds to the whole, like, here in Scandinavia, we basically have division between metal, all of this stuff, but also different like if we start then looking at biodegradable and then separating them or keep conserving them in certain ways, they can be used. So that's another way to think about how can we conserve in society. Laura, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I just what Dipti said about the onion skins, that even just the one material, there's like almost endless possibilities. Depending,
Exactly.
you can make like the gradient yellows, and we kind of discovered the same thing with the mushrooms, where I think we ended up gathering quite a lot of different species of mushroom, a lot of different types, but then we sort of discovered that even out of the one type of mushroom, we still ended up getting like 5 different colors or something, or you can use different parts of it, and so you could literally, like, I feel like you could just pick one dye material and spend the rest of your life figuring it out. There's just so much to learn and so much to do, and like
different materials give different colors. So if you have a lamb wool which is like gray, it gives different tone. If it's like merino wool with a bit of like creamish color, it gives different thickness and so on. And all this again, like thanks to this course that I get to be exposed with these all kind of possibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to clarify a point that you made, Laura, you said that last year apparently was a good year for mushroom. When you say that, is that quantity of mushrooms, variety of mushrooms, size of mushrooms? That would be good to know.
So I think it was kind of quantity, because I mean, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but it depends a lot on the weather conditions. So if it's been a very, very dry summer, there's less mushrooms during the autumn. And I think because, mushrooms need a lot of water to grow. But then I think there's also, maybe you also don't want there to be too much rain, because in Finland we've got a lot of swamps, so you don't want everything to be completely waterlogged, because then the too much water like on top of the ground. And so I think it's something to do with weather conditions and the amount of rain. And basically, at least last year, there was a lot of mushrooms. And I don't know about the sort of like quality or variety, but the quantity was definitely there. And then especially with the dye mushrooms, because a lot of them are inedible, and most people go to the forest to pick the edible mushrooms in Finland. So sometimes with the dye mushrooms, because I was the only one in the forest picking the inedible mushrooms, some of them were they had time to grow to be really, really huge because nobody had picked them yet. So it was a good year in terms of the quantity, and at least for the dye mushrooms also how big they grew, because there were certain types that I don't know what they're called in English, I don't remember, but there's like types that sort of expand outwards, and I found some that like huge. And that was because nobody else had picked them yet, and then I came along and I was like, oh yes, I can use this for dyeing. There's sort of I think this comes back to a bit what Jenni-Liisa was talking about, how it's sort of like a cultural thing in Finland to like go out and gather things in nature, but there's also a bit of like these sort of cultural safety rules. Is if you're not sure what the mushroom is, you shouldn't pick it, or you shouldn't you should wash your hands as soon as possible afterwards, or if you touch a mushroom that might be poisonous, you're not supposed to eat right after, and things like that. Yeah, some of the dye mushrooms they're either inedible or somewhat poisonous, not like necessarily lethal, but you don't want to accidentally eat them or anything either. So there's these kind of safety rules that you also need to observe. It's a bit less friendly than berry picking, I'd say, or like a bit. You have to pay attention a little bit more to what you're doing and how you're doing it, and sort of taking care of yourself a bit more.
Yeah, Purita, is there anything from your perspective? What were your takeaways?
Yeah, we're going to that direction. For me, the course was experimenting my kind of expression, but it was also like learning how to use the natural dyes and dyeing all together in a safe way, and in a way that you can recreate the results later. It was kind of learning all these professional processes about the dyeing, and I think that's important also, even though the goal was to express and make an artwork out of it, but we were talking about the future and how we should kind of use more sustainable dyeing methods. So in order to make a real impact in the future, you kind of need to be able to recreate the process and do it in a safe way and in a larger scale. So I think that was one of my takes.
And I think that's very important because this research, this experimental research is very important to track how you go through the process, what you do, how you do it, so that someone can replicate those results. And especially, as you say, we're thinking about sustainable futures. It's making sure that other industries can replicate this to get that.
Yeah,
So I think that's fantastic, especially if we think about Colors for Craft and the project. Lisa, so now hearing all of the student kind of feedback, what was your takeaway from hearing not only the students today, but also at the end of the course when it was finished? What were your key takeaways from a teacher perspective, so to speak?
This has been really great to hear from all of you, Piritta, Dipti, and Laura, about your takeaways, because this is also new information for me. We didn't discuss it to this kind of depth, I think, in the last meeting of the course. But during and after the course, I was really kind of observing the processes and the different ways that the students or the small groups of students were sort of taking the task and sort of problem solving and what kind of approaches they would take. And they were basically like, we had 4 groups and there were like 2 different kinds of approaches to the task. And one was to be really quite material-led, like as we were sort of, that was one of the aims of the course also. Like Laura mentioned, that they went like from scratch to the forest, picking all of the dye materials and then kind of seeing where that will take them, like what kind of colors they can get from these mushrooms. And also actually the inspiration for the artwork then came from the mushrooms. So it was really full-on material-led process. And then the other way that some of the students went was more like that they produced a theme and an idea for the colors that they wanted to create, and then they were finding then the plants, researching where can we get this color from, and what plants do we need, and how do we dye with those, and to create this color palette that we designed. And that was super interesting to sort of see these 2 different processes and also kind of maybe observe how the students were feeling in this process. I think that maybe the ones that had this color palette beforehand had to struggle a little bit to create the actual colors that they wanted, and maybe had also some frustrations in the process. And then whereas with the material-led groups, they were taking the colors that as they came sort of, and being very happy with the surprises. And I don't think that one of the processes is better than the other. I think it just was really, really interesting to see that and to observe it. And I think that all of the groups learned a lot, like either way of the process, you learn a little bit different kind of problem solving, and different kind of surprises maybe come also along the way. As a teacher, you kind of have a privilege of seeing these processes, and that's really, really great.
That's fantastic, because one of the goals that you want, I think, for any educator is that it makes a difference, or that there's an impact on what you're actually teaching or what they actually learn, that they then can apply that. And I certainly hear from your students here today that they really valued the experience of taking it from start to finish, learning the process, learning the practices of it, and then being able to have something for the future, whether that's teaching, whether that's producing actual fashion and clothing, or whether to produce craft as well. I think that's a signal to you, Lisa. So congratulations on that, and well done.
Thank you. It has been really, really great to hear this today.
And thank you all. I kind of want to wrap up a little bit and ask you, what is your interest or connection, or what do you know about Colors for Crafts, the project?
Well, I can maybe start this one. I was actually, when I first learned that they were pursuing on this project in the University of Lapland, I kind of went to all the teachers I knew were connected to it and told them that anything that connected to this project, I want to be a part of if I can. And I've been doing a shroom dyeing workshop with Jenni-Liisa, Laura Seppälä, and the Lapland Mushroom Association. So we did some dyeing for the project, and I was also coordinating the summer exhibition. The Seasons for Colors was here in the Arcticum last summer. So
and can I just say that was an amazing exhibition, and if any of our listeners want to see that, we have the online exhibition, which is basically images from the exhibition that Pirita was very much overseeing. So fantastic. Well done. I just had to include that.
Thank you. And I agree that the result was exceptional, and I hope everyone goes to see that online version of the exhibition. That is great also. Yeah, I'm so proud that I could be a part of that exhibition and the project.
Well, there's something particularly interesting because you said once I heard about this project, I went to every teacher to ask about it. What was it about Colors for Crafts that was it the natural dyeing aspect? Was it taking natural dyes and finding a way to make it more sustainable? What element of it really drew you in?
It was both the natural dyeing, because that's kind of everything I have been doing in my studies. I have tried to connect with the natural dyeing in a way or another, but also the aspect of looking into the future.
Mm-hmm.
So like finding the solutions for the future. That's something I'm really interested in also.
Jenni-Liisa?
Well, I thought perhaps maybe if the students want to go first.
Well, I can say for my part, at least, that most of my connection to the Colors for Crafts project came from the course, because I hadn't really heard of it before. And then at the beginning of the course, we were told that you know, the dyeing and like the research that we do as students in the dye would be helpful to the project, or like also somewhat used in the project. So that's sort of most of what I know about it. But it was really interesting during the course because we were encouraged to sort of be a bit more scientific or a bit more sort of research oriented as well in the coursework. So even though, like as Jenni-Liisa said, you know, some of the groups were sort of like my group as well. We kind of, you know, we just collected some things and then we saw what colors we got, and you know, we were happy with whatever the result was, and then we just used the colors as they came out of the dye pot. So it wasn't sort of like pre-planned as such, as you know, we didn't decide what colors we want. We were more like, well, you know, let's see what we get. But then at the same time, even though we were kind of going in with this attitude of, well, we'll see what we get, we still had to be recording everything that we were doing and making sure that we took good notes. And then we had to fill in these like the kind of like dye cards or material cards at the end of the course, where we'd put like a little sample of each material we dyed and what we used to dye it and how we dyed it and what material it was and so on, so that, you know, hopefully the results can be replicated. And that was in some ways, I think in my group, we all felt a little bit like we're these sort of like, you know, the stereotypical mad scientist, where we're just sort of like trying everything out and seeing what happens. And we didn't really have a plan going into it or anything. But then we were still taking these like really meticulous notes and like writing down everything we were doing. So it was a really interesting contrast. And sort of, I don't know, like knowing that kind of work process was then also used for like this bigger research project or this, like, you know, as part of this bigger thing. Was, I don't know, it was quite a fun idea, because for us, we were just kind of like taking things as they come and seeing how everything goes and like experimenting, and we had absolutely no plan.
I think your terminology there of mad scientist, we're going to use that on the Colors for Crafts project, because I feel like that's what we all are. In one way or another, we're like a mad scientist. There's so much going on. I love that term. Yeah, and that, I mean, it really felt like that. We were just sort of trying things out, but then taking all these notes, and then it's kind of like, it's like a very funny idea to me, at least, that you know, maybe someone using these notes that we took, like, you know, our process was just like, oh, let's see what happens, but then someone reading the notes is like taking them as instruction. It's like, it's, you know, like trying to replicate that process. So it's kind of like, it's like a very funny idea to me that might be used in the Colors for Crafts project as like, you know, like a basis for
for some of the research or some more experiments or something like that. So
what's really
but
great
yeah, I
is
think that was most of my connection to the project.
What's really interesting is about the fact that you say that we seem like we were just crazy and we were mad about doing all of this, when in actuality, historically, from my perspective as working with part of the history part of the team, is that was what all the recipe cards were. That's what the recipe traditions were, was finding what worked, what didn't work. You see a lot of recipes where things are marked out and they're replaced with something else because you see that something didn't work. So your process is what has been happening throughout history. It's what exactly we do. So it's a method that's kind of tried and true. So you are a mad scientist with a long history of mad scientists.
As I mentioned that in my master's thesis, my thesis was the research was based in art-based. So I used art-based research method for community well-being. And most of the workshop was done in the natural setting. And this kind of has always been my interest, this well-being aspect. And I think it's going to continue, that I would, as an artist, would like to use art as a method to help people in their mental and physical well-being. So I also happen to understand that this colors for craft, one of the aspects of that is that they would like to explore the relationship, between the health and the well-being and the craft. And since this last 2-3 years, what I have been living in Finland, I also feel that actually this could be a very potential method, especially in the small towns, as I have been working with a lot of retired people and old people, and they seem to find joy in crafts and knittings and crochettings and embroidery, as well as me, because all this area has been new to me. So I feel like this is an amazing method to incorporate in every municipality's workshops and use this as a method for the well-being, and encourage also, the local people to participate. Not only the local methods and initiations, what is already available in Finland, but for example, me, I'm coming from a different culture. I come from a different culture and background, so my input and my perspective would definitely influence the local, and that is what I want to achieve in the future. I want to continue to incorporate different cultural methods, learn and give and take and share, and use these art-based methods. And definitely textile is a big part of Finnish crafts and culture anyway, since history. I think it just is coming back now.
I absolutely agree. That's one of the things I think is exciting about the Colors for Craft project, is because we're thinking about not how we can improve the future, but we can also how we can help individuals. There's a broader impact here. And I think, I'm a Christmas nut. That is no excuse. Paritta and Lisa can tell you, all I talk about is Christmas, but one of my favorite things is crafting at Christmas. And there's something kind of, I don't know if it bodily, with your body, chemically, it releases endorphins. There's something about creating something and using specific colors and using specific things to create something that makes you calmer, that makes you happier, and I think in a world where today there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of, we've got to get things done and all of this, that's taking a step back, which craft often does, or as Laura was talking about, the process of going into the forest, collecting things, that's a very calming, relaxing, stepping away from what always we do in our everyday, that we create some time for ourselves. And I think that's a huge part of, and crafts can contribute to that. And to be honest, I never thought of it that way before this project.
Exactly. Yeah, me neither.
No, I just wanted to respond to this question as well about my connection to the project Color for Crafts. So I am working as one of the researchers in the team of University of Lapland, and although my I'm teaching full time, so my participation in the project is limited, but it is connected to my teaching, and I see it as a great opportunity to develop my teaching in the natural dyes, but also develop teaching materials for maybe hopefully could be used by other people as well. And one of the things that we have been developing, and Piritta has been a part of it too, is the sort of the yearly cycle of natural colors here in the north, like what kind of plants and mushrooms we have growing here, and what kind of colors you can obtain from them, and also when good time to pick them throughout the year. So this is kind of what I'm working on, or one of the things that I'm working on in this project.
And that's great, creating the methodology and the processes that can be used to inspire and teach future generations, which I think is which is another component that comes out of this Colors for Craft project, is learning how to teach this stuff, learning how to impart this knowledge for future research and for future sustainability. Absolutely. So I'm going to tie up with the two final questions. The first question is, from your perspective, what is the future of natural dyes? What is the future of natural colors?
I really think that we need to learn and embrace a new kind of aesthetic, because the natural dyes have a different kind of aesthetic to them. They are not that stable as the industrial dyes. I think we have to accept that the color is not always going to be the way that it is now, and we need to learn to love that. And I think we are learning to love the aesthetics of the natural dyes.
That's a very good point.
I mean, I get the notion that I think people are starting to be more aware nowadays with this, even the whole word, like I mentioned before, the natural and nature-based, especially after the pandemic, has been, I think people are starting to appreciate more this natural-based and nature-based kind of settings, and also the material. I personally don't believe in the consumerism and mass production constantly, because I don't know, maybe I'm getting older and hopefully wiser, but I feel like I don't find any sense anymore in constantly buying products and changing it all the time. And this textile course has opened that window for me to appreciate, be selective, and it lasts quite long as well, something that is naturally created. So nowadays I've been practicing to also reuse. For example, in Finland, there's a very good culture of secondhand shops where you find amazing, well intact, clothes and materials, which I'm always amazed, and I really love to go hunting for these, and I find always amazing products and pure wool, like fabrics, and these puseros, like, these sweaters. I'm falling into that kind of trend where I want to reuse, recycle, appreciate where these materials have came from, and use and be selective. And I don't know, I think there's the saying, less is more. So I feel more comfortable also in this. And I have a good feeling that this will eventually, people are gonna get bored, I hope, with all the mass production. This is so new and exciting.
And I think you have a very valid point. And it raises the question, I think, of also the generational perspectives of natural dyes and using that. And is the younger generation do they place more value on specific colors, how bright colors are? Or are they placing more value on stuff that's sustainability, stuff that's natural, stuff that's good for the environment? From my perspective, there seems to be a split between that. Like there is more value on having those natural colors, but I do see a large percentage of younger people very interested in those sustainable, naturally produced items, clothing, colors.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Dipti. Like I try to especially recently, or in recent years, I've tried to make more and more of my things, like clothes or stuff like that, myself, or try to figure out ways of, maybe getting things from the secondhand shops or stuff like that, try to reduce, at least for one person's small part, try to reduce the impact on the world's resources and the nature. And I definitely agree with Dipti on that. And I think I really hope as well that sort of over time, going back to I think there's a very big value in the sort of more traditional ways of making things. And I hope over time we sort of try to be not necessarily go back to all of it, but sort of like incorporate more of the traditional methods of, dye production or textile production, or even like farming practices and in general, because a lot of them are more sustainable or better for the environment. So I'm kind of hoping that there's it's slowly going to shift back to things, the pace of life being a little bit slower and the sort of pace of producing things being a little bit slower, and
taking value in the actual craft being produced, the value of the product itself. Absolutely. I think that's changed. I think historically, there used to be very much about craftsmanship. When we think about shoes, particularly in England, the creation of shoes and the pattern and making that as an industry, as tailored as well, as another huge industry. I think we've shifted when we've gone to fast fashion, fast clothing, what can we get on the spot? And now there may be a swing back to the natural, organic craft and creation of materials. Any final comment before I ask my last concluding question?
Well, I kind of wanted to elaborate. It was interesting what Dustin, you said about the young people and what kind of colors they are interested in, and whether there is a different generational difference. I've recently developed quite a strong passion for knitting, and I'm following all kinds of knitters and knitwear designers on social media. And there's sort of the trends, color trends that I am extracting from it is like there is this strong natural colors, kind of also just neutrals, like the natural sheep colors. But then as a contrast, there are these neon colors. And that's also an interesting combination, maybe like we need some of those really bright colors and we can't produce that with natural dyes. Like, okay, so then maybe accent colors can be produced with synthetics and combining that with the natural dyes. But then also as a designer, maybe we need to consider the different kinds of fading of the colors and how, if they are combined, what does that do to the piece when it has been used for a few years or washed tens of times. And these kind of considerations are something that we might need to look at. Another thing, which not necessarily my kind of strongest expertise, but the production of the dyes, I guess, is a problem if we continue to consume in the amounts that we are consuming now, and apparently it's only growing. So we can't really produce that much natural dyes in the traditional farming ways because we need land for food production. And so I guess in the future, what needs to be looked at is how we can sort of use the natural resources for dyes, like the mushrooms, how we can better take advantage of that. We know already about the berries that even though we Finnish people are crazy about picking berries, then still a lot of it is left in the forest. Like there's no way we can pick all of the berries. And I think the same goes with the mushrooms as well. So how to harvest in an economic and sustainable way, of course, like we don't want to also exploit the forests. And then the laboratories grown dyes, like bacterial dyes, I suppose, will be a big thing that needs to be researched. And if we can produce dyes in a larger quantity in the laboratory. And then, of course, the side streams of any industry, like forest industry and food industries. There are, like Dipti mentioned, the onion dyes, which is a great example of using kind of kitchen waste for creating dyes. So these are the things that I guess are already researched a lot and need to be researched much more in the future. But yeah, the color trends is one thing and the consumer behavior as well. We as designers should look into quite closely.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that we're moving in that shift. And I think one of the things, the value of kind of the research of how can we change the molecular structure of color, how can we make craft natural dyes more accessible, is also forces us to re-examine how synthetic dyes are used. How can we modify those to make them more environmentally friendly? It may not take out everything, but it can force us to think about how it can be more environmentally friendly or not wreak a greater havoc on the environment. So I think it's a symbiotic relationship that we're not going to get rid of one, we're not going to have another one, but how can we work together with? And that's a great point that you raised up. So the final question I like to ask of all of our guests is, what does color mean to you? As an example, color for me means joy. It's an emotion for me. It's not something that I look at in its clothing. It's what makes me feel good that day. It's an emotion. It's joy that I get from it. What does color mean for each of you?
For me, it's expression. It's expression in my art, but it's also expression in everyday life. Just like you said, you get joy from that. But I kind of choose my apparel to the day based on how I want to be seen today. Yeah, for me, it's expression.
Okay.
I think for me it has been like a therapy. So the days when I feel kind of low, I intentionally try to use more joyful colors, and it does actually affect my mood and, the whole day actually.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one before.
I think for me it's kind of change. I used to, like what Dipti said earlier, that everyone in Finland uses black. I used to be, I would only dress in black and maybe gray. I think in recent years, in the last few years, I've sort of just started using more and more color, first maybe with things I bought and then later on with things I made. And the more I make things and the more I craft and the more I've been, kind of getting into this like whole natural dyes world, the more color I want to use and the more color I'm just using more and more colors in my life. And so I think it's kind of like, it's like this change or like kind of coming out of my shell maybe, because, when you're younger, maybe you don't really know who you are yet and you're kind of trying to figure it out. And I think that's colors, for me at least, have been part of that in the last few years, where I feel like I used to only use black and now I'm really branching out and trying different colors that maybe teenage me would be horrified about.
I think that's an interesting point, because color means to you life cycle, because you go through the life cycle, and I certainly don't have the same colors or use the same colors that I did when I was younger, but now it's slightly different. So colors is a life cycle. You go through a life cycle.
Well, for me, I would say color means emotion. I think that you all kind of mentioned that as well, that it really affects my mood, the colors that I see around me, and also that I can express my moods with the colors as well. But then from a more like designer or artist perspective, it means play. It's wonderful to experiment and try out color combinations and then just play with the colors. And that's one of the most exciting things about it.
I love that. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this morning and sharing your thoughts and opinions. We really appreciate it, and we've gotten to know you a little bit more. And thank you to our listeners for joining in.